two things. One, this presentation is an introduction. However, if you do have more advanced skills, I would ask you to kind of hang out through the whole thing. I guarantee you're going to learn some things new. If you are brand new to Microsoft Word, it might even seem like we're going too fast. There will be a video recording of this made available by the end of the day tomorrow, and you can go through it at your own speed. So one of the questions we get quite often right off the bat is, I don't have Microsoft Word, or I have an old version of Microsoft Word. Would this be valuable to me? Well, let's talk about versions a little bit. Microsoft has been around for many, many years, and you may have an older computer with Word 2000, 2003, 2007. I have computers with all of those, and I can create a resume that's relevant to today. Also, I can follow the majority of the instruction I'm going to give you with those versions. So it doesn't really matter what version you have, especially if your version is within the last 10 years. Microsoft Word 2010 through 2019 look very similar. Anything older than 2003 and older is going to look a little bit different. However, you still do the same things. There's just some bells and whistles that are added, and there's some changes to what I call the interface. That's just basically what you see of Word when you open it. Other than that, we aren't really talking about brand new things when we do new versions, especially in an introductory fashion. All right. So first off, do you have to buy Microsoft Word? No, you do not. If you have it, keep it. It's the greatest word processor I've ever been involved with. I've been teaching Word for over 20 years. I really like it, but I don't pay for it. I wouldn't pay for it. I'm fortunate enough to have it on my work computer, but at home I use free options. So I'll be talking about 3 free options that you can access. One is to create a Microsoft account. Another is to install something called LibreOffice. And then the third option is using something called Google Docs. So we're just going to spend just a couple of moments talking about each of those. First off, the Microsoft account. If you have a MSN, a Hotmail, or an Outlook account, you already have this. If you don't, consider creating an email at one of those domains. And I think right now the only thing you could really work with is outlook.com. So you would just go to the web link I'm going to give you, and then you would click on Create a New Account. Again, if you already have one, you don't have to do this. Once you do that, it's like any email account you've ever set up. You'll get an email account. I know that's one more thing to keep track of, but there's some real benefits to having a Microsoft account. Your email would look just like this, and of course I blacked out my emails just because there is going to be a recording of this. This would be the section in which you would see all of your emails. But what you would do from here is you would go to the far left-hand part of your screen to something called the Apps Launcher, and that's right over there. And by the way, I apologize if the animations make your eyes buggy. It's just much easier to have that animation so people know exactly where we're trying to focus our attention. This is also called the waffle, and many times you'll hear it called the waffle. I call it the Apps Launcher. If you click on that, you're going to see all of the services that come for free with your account. So you're going to have Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, all sorts of different things. Skype is actually owned by Microsoft now. Now, these are not the same as the paid versions. Otherwise, why would they sell the paid versions? But for most of us, they're perfectly fine. So if you were to click on Microsoft Word, you would get something that looks very similar to this. And this just looks like an older version of Word. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it has a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So if you're just getting into Word, this is a great option. It has the added benefit of cloud storage. Have you ever heard the term cloud storage before? That means that you're storing your information on the internet. So when you talk about Microsoft Word, a lot of people will insert the term OneDrive. And that just means that that is the service that comes with your Microsoft account that allows you to store your files online. And there's some real advantages to that because now they're not tied to any computer. You just need to get on the internet and you can access your file from anywhere. Another option that I really like is something called LibreOffice. So every one of these is not just the word processor, it's a whole what we call suite of information, so it's many programs. We're, of course, focusing on the word processing part of it. But LibreOffice has been around a long time. It used to be known as OpenOffice. OpenOffice is still around, but LibreOffice kind of took a different path from OpenOffice. It's absolutely free. You certainly could donate. It's a nonprofit. But if you download it, the only thing you need to know is what type of computer you're downloading it to. And for the vast majority of people, it's going to be Windows 64-bit. There's ways of finding that out. You can look on your computer and search for it, type of computer or whatever. Most computers in the last 10 years are going to be 64-bit. Of course, if you have a Linux computer or a Mac computer, you'd have to download those specific programs. And what it's going to give you is something that looks like this. Again, it just looks a lot like Word. And the reason all of these things look like Word is the #1 word processor in the United States. And if someone were to make something that was completely different and acted completely different and required a completely different set of skills, no one would use it. So all of these are just free resources. The key with all of these are, though, you need to save these documents as Word files. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's the only kind of thing you have to worry about. If I created a document on this LibreOffice program, and I saved it as a Word document, I could send it to an employer, and when they clicked on it, it would open up in Word. And I've tested this for over 10 years. It looks perfect. It looks exactly like I had intended it to look. They don't know what was created with LibreOffice. And like I said, it's free. The third option I'm going to give you is the one to be a little bit careful about. A lot of people who come out of education situations have used Google Docs because Google Docs works really, really well with sharing files back and forth. A lot of schools use Google Docs because it's very cheap for them to do it. As an employer, when I get a Google Doc as a resume, sometimes I'm hesitant to open it because there's some virus concerns, possibly. I've actually gotten a virus when someone shared a Google Doc with me. But you could still use it. Again, you just need to save it as a Word document. I'll give links to how to do that for each of the options I gave you in the follow-up email. This just requires a little bit of extra clicking. You get your Gmail account. This time the app launcher is on the right-hand side, or the waffle. You click that, and you go to something called Google Drive, which is just the Google online storage that's included with your account, again for free. Once you open that, now you can open up a new Google Doc. So you would just click on New, and then Google Doc, and then Blank Document. And I do realize that is several clicks, but it is free, works pretty well, and it's going to look just like any word processor would. It's going to act very similar to Microsoft Word. Before we move on, is there any questions we need to get to at this time, Lori?
Yes, Art, I have a great question here. There was someone who was wondering, oftentimes when they're doing their resume and they're going to send it online, the employer is asking it for it to be saved as a PDF. What is the difference between a PDF and an MS, Microsoft Word?
Yeah, okay. So I get this question a lot, and it's something that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on simply because there's some things to consider. If an employer asks you for a PDF, that stands for Portable Document Format. It's something that's created with Adobe, used to be at least. Now you can create it with virtually anything. It's very simple to create a PDF from a Word document. You don't create a PDF from Adobe unless you have a very expensive program. You create it from any word processor. So from Google Docs, from LibreOffice, from Word, you would create the document and you would just save it as a PDF. So I'm just going to give you a quick example, and I'll go back and forth with this as we get questions. So I'm going to bring up a Word document. So if I'm going to save something as a Word document, the key is right down here where it says Save As Type. I would click that drop down, and then I would click PDF. Again, we'll go through that more thoroughly in a few slides here, but the reason I want to bring it up now is what the difference is between a PDF and a Word document. A Word document is editable, meaning that you can change it anytime you want. A PDF document is locked. You can't edit it, at least not very easily. So once you have a PDF, and then you want to edit it for the next employer you want to send your resume, that can cause some problems. So at least understand that. Always have a Word version available. Any other questions, Lori?
Yes, you know, Art, when you were just explaining that, my screen was gray. So I don't know if everybody else's was too,
Okay.
but I didn't see anything that you were doing.
Okay. So
And then, yeah, it's still gray.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
And it's, yeah, they're saying mine too, mine was gray.
Thanks for the feedback. I'll fix that when we get into the demonstration portion.
Okay, we wanted to know too, really quick. So the question was, what's better to send PDF or the Microsoft Word? And isn't it that we send whatever the employer is asking for? Is that
Very
correct?
seldom will they tell you what they want. If they do want something specific, absolutely send what they want. What you really want to stay away from is something like a Google Doc as a native, meaning that it's saved as a Google Doc, or an open document format, or a WordPerfect, or one of the worst ones back in the day was Microsoft Works. Employers will not struggle to open a resume. If they can't open it, they will go on to someone else's. If it's a PDF or Word, in most cases, it doesn't matter to them. There are benefits both ways for you. But the reason I always keep my resume as a Word document is because if I ever have to edit that document, every version I find anywhere is going to be a Word document. Some people are very concerned about privacy or someone changing a document, so they like to save it as a PDF, and that's perfectly acceptable. Just realize the limitations of that. The one thing I would say not to do, no matter what, is when you, if you have a paper copy of your resume, make sure that you don't scan it into a scanner and then send that as a PDF. The reason is sometimes the employer will not be able to do a word search on it because it'll be looked at as a picture instead of as digital text. So that's something to consider. All right, we're going to go on to the layout of, again, what we call the Word interface. This is what I'm going to call it, for lack of a better term. This is what happens when you open up Word. Some versions of Word, it's going to open a little differently, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. But I'm going to go through all the pieces of the Word interface. And the reason I do this is it's very easy to follow instruction if you understand what they're talking about. Obviously, that makes sense, right? So if I were to say, I want everyone to click on the dialog box launcher and the paragraph grouping of the page layout tab on the ribbon, that's a lot of gobbledygook. And it's very hard to follow that. Once you break down the terminology and understand what the component parts of it are, it's very easy to follow instruction. And I'm going to give you some world-class free training at the end of today's seminar. I'm going to give you the links to that, and also some ways that you can test yourself to see where you're at in Microsoft Word. But again, it's very important to know the terms because in the test you take, and many employers do require this, that you take a word processing proficiency test. At least some of the test is about terminology, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is this. Looks like file, right? Notice how in this version of Word, it's blue. It's not going to be blue in every version, but it's blue. That's called the Backstage view. Nowhere on your Word screen is it going to say Backstage view, but that's the term that's used. So when someone says go to the Backstage view, they mean click on File. And it's going to bring you to this kind of other screen. Behind the scenes, that's the way to think of it. On here, you're going to have a lot of different options, and many of these options can be accessed elsewhere. There are other ways of doing that. There's usually 3 ways of doing anything in Microsoft Word. I'm going to show you one. There are others. We're going to start off with new, because this is what many people see when they open up Word. When you open up newer versions of Word for the first time, you're going to get something similar to this. And the reason is they want you to understand that there are templates you can work off, like resume templates and meeting minute templates and all sorts of different things. In fact, you can search for templates here. And if you never have to go to this area, you're not going to know they exist. It's an inconvenience for me, so I set mine up to bypass this. But for most people, when you open up Word, this is what you're going to see, something similar. All you have to do is click on blank document, and then it will open up back to that interface. Going back to the Backstage view, we're going to talk about the next one, which is open. Open is opening a pre-existing document. It's really important when you save a document, when you receive a document, when you rename a document, that you name it something specific and you put it in a specific place. The reason that's really important is unless you do that, you're not going to be able to find it, very easily at least. I don't know about you, but I've had some files that I've spent weeks looking for, and I just had to retype them. And then a couple months later, I stumble upon them. I'm like, oh, that was, an hour of my life I'm not getting back, and I had to redo something that was already there. So I'm very, very careful when I name and place documents in a location. To open a document, all you have to do is click on Open. Depending on the version you have, you may have to click on Browse down below here, and it's going to open up this dialog box. You can hear me use this term over and over and over. Dialog box is just a window that pops up within a program. It's not a separate program. It's a window that pops up that gives you options. That's the easiest way to think about it. So what they're asking me here is, where did I put this document and what's the file name? So in this case, the document is stored on the base folder, or the folder of local disk C, which is just your hard drive. And once I click on that in the location side, on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, it's going to show what's in that location. So these are the subfolders in that location. And you can have many, many, many different subfolders. This is just the second level, or the folder within the folder. And then I would just double-click on that folder, or single-click and click Open, and it's going to show me what's in that folder. So in this case, I have a file called MS Word Instruction. Okay, that's pretty descriptive. And then it says .docx. Many people never see this. It's called a file extension. It's just what tells the computer what program to open up this information in. When you save a Word document, you're not saving the entire program. You're saving a little bit of data that is then interpreted by a program, whatever program it's associated with. So when I add this .docx, and you can see right down here, it's going to be a .docx file. That's what tells the computer what to do with that. For most modern operating systems, they hide that extension. I choose to expose it because there's reasons I want to see that. You normally don't have to worry about it. Unless you're renaming a file and you see it, make sure you keep that same extension. And then I would just click on the file and then click on Open. And again, I'm going to get back to my Word interface. And now on this section, which we call the title bar, it's going to give the title of that document that was pre-existing. Okay. Next one is one of the most important things to learn in Word, and most of us learn it the hard way. In the chat box, if you would, has anyone ever put a lot of work into a document and then forgot to save it and therefore lost it because of a crash or a power outage? If someone says no here, I'm going to question you. Yeah, I'd like to say I learned that lesson long ago, but at least once a year I relearn it. I have lost some things. Now, Word will try to save you from yourself. It will try to auto-save, and sometimes that's really helped me out, but never, never, never depend on that. You should save early and save often. So when I save, there's a lot of methods to do this, by the way, but in this case, I'm going to the Backstage view. I'm clicking on Save, and then I get the Save As dialog box. I ask myself two questions. Where do I want to put this, and what do I want to call this? And both are important because if you don't answer those two questions, it will put it wherever it wants, and it will call it whatever it wants, which sometimes is somewhat descriptive. In this case, it would call it document 4. And that's not very descriptive. And then it's putting it in the temp folder. I would never put it there. So again, what you're going to want to do is choose where you want to put it, and then choose any subfolders you want to further organize it within. And then you will double click on that folder to open it. You'll see that up here it's telling you where it's going to save it. And then on the bottom, I called it naming example. I gave it a word, gave it a title, and it's going to save as a Word document. again, from the previous question we had about PDFs, if I wanted to save this as a PDF, I would just click this drop down right here and choose PDF. Then you just click on Save, and that document is now saved once. That just means that it's been given a name and location. After that, it's very easy to save. You just click Save, or you use something called a keyboard shortcut. Now, I'm going to introduce this, and don't worry about it. You don't have to remember all of these keyboard shortcuts, but I'm a big believer in keyboard shortcuts because the simpler I make a process, the more likely I am to be consistent with it. So after I save something for the first time, if I want to resave that information over and over and over again, I just hit the Control key, which is the bottom left of your keyboard, plus the letter S. So I hold down Control, and then with the other finger, I tap the letter S. And I've just saved that. I've saved over the original file with the new information. And one of the questions I get quite often is, how often should I save? My answer is always, only not save what you're willing to lose. So every time I hit Enter, I hit Control S. It's just a keyboard. It's just a keystroke, really. And so I type a paragraph, I hit Enter, I hit Control S. That way I'll never lose more than a paragraph. Now, one of the hardest things to wrap your mind around at the beginning stages of learning Word is the difference between save and something called save as. You notice, if I go back here, this was called the Save As dialog box. You can always see the title of a dialog box in the top left. There is no Save dialog box. But the first time you save something, it's always going to be Save As. So the first time you save, it doesn't matter if you click Save or Save As, because what Save As does is it creates a new document. Save saves over an existing document after the first time. And I know that's kind of hard to kind of word or maybe understand. The way to think of it is, if you want a different version of a file that already exists, like if someone were to send me their resume and they said, can you give me some ideas? I could open up that resume, I could make a whole bunch of changes to it, but if I hit save, I've lost their ideas. Now they're all my ideas, and that's certainly not right. So what I would do is I would do a save as, and then I would save John's resume, Art's ideas. And then there would be a different version of that resume available. Now this is where this comes into play in job search, is every resume we create for an employer is different than the past employer because they have different needs. So you should never send the same resume out to two different employers. Sometimes it's just a quick and easy tweak. You're adding a skill, you're changing the wording of how you describe what you do, but there's going to be just a tweak to it. You may want to have different versions of your resume specific to needs of that employer saved on your folder. And then just save it with something that's descriptive. So it could be resume, Enbridge operator position. And that's what I call a working title. The reason I do that is I think about, in a month from now, what words would I use to find that title? Well, I applied at Enbridge for an operator, and it's a resume. I could use any of those three terms, and I could find that. What I see a lot, and I've seen this for actually a couple decades, is people save everything as some version of resume. Resume 1, Art's resume. It's very hard to find which is the right one. There are some options with looking at the date it was created, but make it simple for yourself. Give it a very specific name. So again, save as would be the same as saving when you save for the first time. All right, the other thing we're going to talk about in the Backstage view, before we get back to the actual Word interface, is print. After print, we'll pause for a couple of questions. Print is the hardest one to talk about simply because it's different depending on how your computer's set up. In this case, I have a network printer with the state of Minnesota, which means that I could print from my desk and then go to any career force locations in the state and wave a badge at that printer, and I could get that document, that follow me document. So this is set up a little different than yours will be. You may have the option to do some of these things, you may not. So they're all specific to the printer. One thing I'm going to mention though, the one-sided, that's simplex. Two-sided would be duplex. That means it just prints on both sides of the piece of paper. The one thing I do want to pull your attention to here though is this. If I were to print this picture, this document off right now, and this happens, by the way, more often than you'd think. You get someone sends you a document and you think, oh, this is about the food drive next week. And you hit print, not realizing that that's one of 200 pages. I once had a student cycle 25,000 pages to one of my printers. And it was a high-speed printer. It was spitting out paper left and right, and we're all trying to figure out how to stop it, and it's not easy to stop. Oh no, just unplug it, that will stop it. The reason is that information gets sent to the printer, and it's basically sitting in the printer's memory, so it's not easy to stop. So always look, make sure you're printing what you think you want to print. There are options to print just a couple of the pages. So where it says print all pages, you can change that to current page or a page range. All right, we'll take a pause here. Gloria, are there any questions we need to get to?
Yes, Art, I have actually two questions that are pretty similar, so I'm going to read them both to you. This one is from a gentleman named Arthur. He said, I have taken classes like this before and I've learned a lot, but by the time I have to use these skills, I've forgotten most of what I've learned. Do you have any ideas? And then I wanted to add Wanda's question too. She asked, can we get the answers to the questions in these documents that you send out tomorrow, please?
Sure, we'll try to take a look at that. So the first, let me take the first question. The first question, by the way, that's a great name.
Yes.
The first question is something I have dealt with over and over again, and that's why I gave you the free resources. If you take a class like this is a lot of information in a short period of time, and you're not able to do this while I'm talking. Some of you may be trying. So I used to teach this as an 8-week course. And we would do samples and we would do practice. I don't have the ability to do that anymore. So we do these introductory courses and then we give you the resources. With Microsoft Word or Excel, same exact advice I'm going to give. Find some activity that would require you to interact with that program daily. So an example for Microsoft Word, maybe you do a journal. Maybe you, to help you in your job search, you're going to do some practice cover letters, or obviously your resume. Also go through the training that I'm going to send you, because you will lose it if you don't use it. I'm sure you've heard that term over and over again. The cool thing is it comes back faster than you think, but employers want it instant. If you said you know how to use Microsoft Word, you better be able to use it right at the beginning. So don't depend on some training you had 5 years ago. Refresh those skills, keep them current. And like I said, I'm going to send you a test you can take that will allow you to work with this. And as far as the questions, yes, any questions that are asked, I will make sure that it's either in the printout or I will send a document. All right, next we're going to talk about the Quick Access Toolbar. Quick Access Toolbar is in the top left of your screen, and it comes with some options already visible. And one of the most important ones is the undo button, which looks like a circular arrow that just undoes the last thing you did. Actually, it goes back quite a ways. So if you have a 100-page document that you inadvertently delete everything out of, one click of undo is going to bring that all back. So it's a really good friend to have, and you need to know about it. Save is on here. So if you don't want to remember that Control-S keyboard shortcut or don't want to go to File, Save, the third option is just click on this, what looks like a floppy disk, if anyone remembers those. That's a blast from the past. So there are a few of these options available here. The cool thing is you can add anything you'd like here. So there is a drop-down, looks like a little arrow. By the way, drop-down just means it's a little arrow pointing down. When you click on it, you get more options. In this case, a drop-down menu. So you could add any of these options, or you could go to hundreds of more options by clicking on more commands. I don't recommend putting a ton of them on there simply because it gets messy. And I mean, think if you put quick print on here. That's a one-click print. Remember that 25,000 page debacle I had? That was because someone hit quick print. So some of these are really good. If you find yourself looking around for an option and you're like, oh, that's 4 clicks away, what you could do is you could add that option to the quick access toolbar so you can have it with 1 click. And that's the purpose of it. So adding open would be just clicking on open, then it'll put a check mark next to it, and then it would exist on the quick access toolbar. Next thing we're going to talk about is the title bar. This whole area is the title bar. However, I'm going to focus in on the center. It gives you the title of the document, and then it says Word. So if you are working on a document for an hour and it still says document 1 up there, you probably haven't saved it. So make sure that you save it, and then the title of that document will show up on the title bar. To complete the layout of the top title bar, we also have the program control buttons, and that is minimize, which would bring this entire document down to our taskbar at the bottom of our screen. It doesn't close it out, it keeps it open, it just minimizes it so that we can look at other stuff. The other option is restore down, that's the middle one. That will make your document sizable so that you can move it around, or you could maybe do a split screen or various different options. Once it's restored down, then it will change to a maximize icon, so it goes back and forth between those two. If you click maximize, it makes it full screen. And then there's close. Now these aren't specific to Microsoft Word, these are in every window you would open of any program you would open. The nice thing they do with close is if you haven't saved your document and you try closing out of it, it'll say, a little dialog box will pop up, a little warning that will say, do you want to save the changes you made to this document? You'd think that would save you. It doesn't always save you. So don't blow past that and say no or cancel. By the way, if you hit cancel on that, it's just going to bring you right back here. So make sure you're saving the work. Now, we don't always need to save the work we're doing. Sometimes it's just a workspace for another program. Maybe you're creating an email and you want to create it in Word so that you can absolutely positively make sure it doesn't go to the wrong person, because that does happen. Or maybe you want to use the spell check options within Word or whatever. There are times where we just use this as a workspace with no intention of saving the document. All right, this next one is really important because it's what's changed with Word since really 2007, but even more so since 2010. The layout of Microsoft Word is turned to something called a ribbon layout, and that's this area right here. If you ever take a test in Microsoft Word, they're going to say, show me the ribbon. Nowhere on here does it say the ribbon. It's just this area. It's from the top left of File and then to the bottom right, in this case, for this particular tab, Edit. So this whole area here. The ribbon is just a combination of a bunch of tabs. Okay, so in this case, the Page Layout tab. So you start on the Home tab, and that's where you're going to spend the majority of your time. 90% of your time, if not more, will be just looking at things on the Home tab. But if you need to go to something else, think of it this way. They're supposed to make sense. So if I wanted to change the margins of my document, I could take an educated guess that would be in Page Layout. See if someone can type this fast enough. What if I wanted to create some mailing labels? See if anyone can type that in fast enough. Which tab of the ones across here would I use, would I click on to get to mailing labels, if you were just to take a guess? Well, there we go. You're all geniuses. Mailings, yes. And that's what you've got to give yourself, is that ability to guess, because half the time it's going to be right. And if you're not right, it's no big deal. You just click on something else. So once you click on one of these tabs, I'm going to zoom in on the Page Layout tab. You'll get a whole bunch of options. And that's the idea of the ribbon, is to visually show you things that used to be hidden in menus, what we call cascading menus. So there'd be a menu you click on, it would give you a whole bunch of options, and then if you went to a certain point, you get more menu options. This is supposed to show it to you visually, so that this icon right here, this picture of columns, looks like columns. So the margins look like margins. So the orientation looks like orientations, on and on. The problem with that is we're really limited to how many of these icons we can include in any tab. So we further define that by grouping them into sections. So on the Page Layout tab, there is the Page Setup grouping, the Paragraph grouping, and the Arrange grouping. If there are more options than can fit in a grouping, they do something extra. Not every tab has this, not every grouping has this, but they add something called a dialog box launcher. really fancy term for here's some more options for you. If you click on that bottom right arrow at the bottom right of any grouping that has it, you're going to get a dialog box. Remember, these things just keep repeating themselves, these terms. So this would give you hundreds of options. I know it looks pretty simple here, but it's got extra tabs, and then it's got things that pop out in front of that, and there's all sorts of different things you can do. The Microsoft Word is something I like to do. I've been doing it for a long time. I don't know everything about Microsoft Word, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I haven't gone into every single possibility, and the reason is I haven't had to. There's been no situation in which I had to do some of these really, really high-level stuff. Doesn't mean they don't exist somewhere in some obscure dialog box, and that's why they're hidden away, because they're not as obvious or they're not used as much maybe as some of the things that would exist on the actual tab. Any questions about that before we move on, Glory?
Yes, Art, we had a question on, do you think it's a good idea to start adjusting the margins when you're doing your resume?
Yeah, so I'm going to use this term quite a bit now. It's called the default. Default simply means what the computer's set at without you having to tell it. So every time you open a computer, or excuse me, open up a Microsoft Word document, it's going to have a whole bunch of defaults stored in something called the normal template. And that is the type of font you have, the size of font you have, the margins you have, all that sort of stuff. So the default margin for Microsoft Word is 1 inch all the way around. Okay? So that means that there will be an inch of white space all around your document. Well, what happens occasionally is you get a 1-page or a 2-page resume that bleeds onto another page. And you think, well, gosh, it's all important stuff. I don't want to edit. I don't want to delete anything. I want to have all that stuff, but I want to get down to just that 1 page or that 2-page. You can play around with the margins a little bit, but I don't play around with them a lot. I much more recommend you edit for content than for margins, at least too dramatically. So 0.8 inches is the lowest I go to 1 inch. And that doesn't give you a whole lot, but it will give you a couple more, excuse me, lines of space that you can, kind of bring those lines up to that previous page.
Excellent. I have one more question, Art. They are wondering, are you going to send a copy or a link of this video?
Yes. And that's why it's going to take till the end of the day tomorrow, is because I'm going to have to download the video, edit the video, upload the video, link the video. I mean, those are my problems, not your problems, but it's not something that happens instantaneously, so you'll get it at the end of the day tomorrow. And like all videos in the Career Force virtual services, they're all available on that virtual and interactive services page eventually. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the ruler. The ruler is something that can be hidden. You may not see it. I always have the ruler up. It just shows you where you are on the page. The standard paper size in the United States, at least, is 8.5 by 11. So you notice that we have this margin area of 1 inch and 1 inch that leaves 6.5 inches of printable space. So that's 8.5 inches. And if we were to scroll down here, it would be to 9 inches here with 1 inch on the top and 1 inch on the bottom for 11 inches. You can change those settings, and if you have a printer that will handle legal paper, that's 8.5 by 14, I believe. There's options for that. So your ruler may change based on the type of paper you say you're using. But what's really neat about this is it's an actual inch. Even if it doesn't look like 1 inch, when you print it off, whatever you type between here and here is 1 inch. So there's some kind of cool things you can do with the ruler by like aligning pictures or using a grid to align things. I've done really, really elementary blueprints on Word. It's a rough tool, but it actually works. And if you print it off, you're going to see it exactly in the measurements you would think. This is your horizontal or your vertical ruler. That's your horizontal up there. If you can't find your ruler, if you don't see it, and this is a great opportunity to explore a little bit on the ribbon. If you go to the View tab on the ribbon, you have several different groupings here, and in the Show grouping, you can see that there's a check mark next to Ruler. If I took that check mark off, the ruler would disappear. So this is a great example of if someone were to ask me, I'm missing my ruler, where do I go? I would say click on the View tab, Show Grouping, top icon. And if they understand the terminology, they can just whiz through that and click on Ruler. So what do you see on the ruler? A couple different things. One is your indents. So this would be right here. This hourglass looking thing is called your left indent. And that's for setting where text starts in a given paragraph or series of paragraphs. It's different than the margin in that margins are where everything starts. If you want to situationally change where some text lines up to maybe make it bumped in a little bit for emphasis, you could move your indent over to an inch or inch and a half or whatever. There's another option that will show up that you can use on the ruler, and that's something called custom tabs. That's a little bit more advanced, but what it allows you to do is set a tab, and then when you hit the tab key, it jumps to that particular setting. We're not going to cover custom tabs today, but it is in the training material I'm going to send along to you. That's the left-hand side of the ruler. The right-hand side of the ruler has the right indent. Not used as much as the left, but this would be where text stops in a given paragraph. Let me talk just a little bit about what paragraph means. I've used that term a lot, and many people would say, well, I know what a paragraph is. It's a complete thought or idea, which is how I was taught in school. Microsoft Word does not adhere to that because it doesn't know what a complete thought or idea is. What it defines a paragraph as is everything that precedes an enter. So every time you hit the enter key, you've created a paragraph. So even a blank line in Microsoft Word could be a paragraph. And there's formats that apply specifically to paragraphs, so it's good to understand that. So if I hit the enter key 3 times, I've got 3 paragraphs. All right, take a look. We got one more thing to look at as far as the interface before we start talking about some additional options of entering and formatting, and that's the status bar. On the very bottom of your screen, you're going to see a blue bar in this case. It may look different on your interface, but it's a bar that has a bunch of things about the status of your document. And we're going to zoom in on the left-hand side of that to look at page numbering. So in this particular document, I've got 201 pages. I happen to be on page 191, and there are 159,323 words in this document. I was joking with Glory yesterday, and I said I typed all night to get that visual. I did not. I did it with just a couple of keystrokes, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a moment. You can very easily get any amount of text into a Word document so that you can play around with it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The other option here is there's proofing, check for proofing errors, kind of like your spell check. That would be on your one of your tabs on the ribbon. And then there's something right here called macros recording. That's a more advanced option. It's for recording, a process. Maybe you do the same 20 clicks on a document every day. What you could say is, I'm going to record that and name it so that I can just click it and it'll do all of those 20 things for me without me having to go through that, repetitive process. So that's what macros are. On the right-hand side of the status bar, jumping over there, we have 2 different things to talk about. First is the view buttons. The view buttons here are just how you look at a document. It doesn't change the document. So this particular view button would be like a book layout. So it'd be for reading. So you get like 2 sides to a page. What we normally work in is print layout view, which is right here. And then if you're creating a web page off of Microsoft Word, which you can do, this would be web layout view. And that just makes your ruler much wider, and then allow you to do some background colors and that sort of thing. If your document ever looks different than you expect it to look at your views and make sure you're on the print layout view. There are 2 additional views available on that view tab that I had showed you before. There's outline and draft. They're not used as much, so they're not included on the status bar. This, however, is something you should all be aware of. This next one, this is the zoom option. The zoom option allows you to go in and out of a document. Once we switch over to, just using Microsoft Word, I'll make that the active screen, and I'll show you the zoom a little bit more. The idea of the zoom is it allows you to, if some print's really small and you want to make it larger to look at, you can zoom it in. It will not change how it prints, however. So it's just how you view it. And whatever you set your zoom to, it sticks. So when you close out of that document and then reopen Microsoft Word, it will be at whatever zoom setting you had it set to. Okay. All right, let's stop just for a moment. Gloria, is there any questions we need to get to?
Yes, so one of the questions, in getting back to the Zoom, was what happens if I leave the Zoom at 180% as my default? And I change it later on, does it go back to the default?
It will stay at, like I think I just mentioned, it'll stay at whatever you had it set to last. There are some things that just stick. Some things get zeroed out, but some things just stick, and Zoom is one of them. You either have it at whatever you have it at. It's easy to change. You just slide it back and forth or use the minus buttons. When we go to the live demonstration, I'll show you how to get the optimal zoom for your screen. I can't just give you a percentage because everyone has different size monitors, different settings in your operating system. So there's a way of tweaking it a little bit so that it's giving you the most page to look at. Any other questions before we move on, Gloria?
There's a couple, but you're going to be answering them next.
Okay.
So go on.
Sure. So next we're going to talk about entering text. And before we do that, I kind of mentioned this before. In fact, let me go back even further. At the beginning, I said, no matter how advanced you are in Microsoft Word, I'm hoping to give you something you didn't know. And this might be one of those things you didn't know. This particular formula, and disregard the insertion point that's here, just the equals RAND, left parenthesis, 5, 4. And by the way, I'm going to send this to you so you don't have to worry about writing it down. What that will do is give you some text in 5 paragraphs with 4 lines in each paragraph. So I could change these to 100, 20, or 4, 2, or whatever. And what that will do is once I hit enter, it just gives you some sample text to work with. So when you want to try things out on Word, it's really hard to try things out with just a line. It's really fun to be able to work with a 200-page document. So maybe you can try to do page numbering or some headers and footers or whatever. With that simple little formula, you can create as much text as you want like that. Okay, that's one of the most used tools I have, and I still use it to this day. When I want to try something out with columns and breaks and some more advanced stuff, I don't want to do it on my resume because I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to inadvertently change something I didn't want to change. So this text can be created as much as you want, anytime you want. Okay. So when you enter text, Word just enters from the left to the right, and it will push anything that happens to be to the right of your text forward. So it inserts. If you ever get into a situation where it overtypes, meaning that you start typing and text starts disappearing, that's a problem. That's called overwrite mode. They make it really hard to turn that on. In the past, it was turned on by hitting the insert key, which many people don't even know exists. It's to the right of your backspace key. So if that inadvertently gets turned on, as you type, things disappear. And it's very frustrating if you don't want that to happen. But for the most part, it just inserts from the left to the right and pushes any text you have forward. So here's a little quiz. You don't have to type this in, but just think about it. Ask yourself, have you ever seen this sentence before? And I guarantee you, if you haven't seen it, you will start seeing it because it's used a lot. It's used in computer fonts to show what different things look like. It's used for a lot of descriptions. And the reason it is it's the shortest sentence in the English language that uses all 26 characters. So if you were to practice typing in Microsoft Word, you could type "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog" over and over and over again, and you're going to get all 26 characters. It also is very nice to see how fonts look, and by the way, fonts are just the way your text looks. So in this case, I have a sans serif font, which is a fancy word for saying it doesn't have any extra embellishments. It's just very standard. So this is Calibre. Tahoma would be another sans serif font. A serif font would be something like the older Times New Roman, which had some extra embellishments. That makes it harder to read. And I'll show you some examples of that in a couple slides.
Art, I did have a question about a font before you get too much farther. So Steve was wondering, what about using Microsoft-specific fonts like Verdana in LibreOffice? He's wondering if it still works.
Yeah, so usually if you ask that question, don't. You can get fonts for everything. There's a misconception for a lot of people about where fonts live. Fonts aren't part of Microsoft Word. They're part of your operating system. Now, that might be a little bit different for Libra. I haven't really worked into that. But if you go to your control panel, there'll be a folder called Fonts. And you'll see the quick brown box jumps over the lazy dog, perfect example, in all the different types of fonts. And where you have to really be careful is if you download a fun font, like a TV show specific font, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer font. They exist, by the way. Star Trek The Next Generation font. If you were to send that to an employer, even if it would look professional, they wouldn't have that font installed on their computer, and they may not be able to open it. So it's always a really good idea, when in doubt, to test it. Send it to someone. Ask them to open it up in Word and say, does this look right? I've been very fortunate in every LibreOffice situation in that I've never had it fail me. That doesn't mean it couldn't fail you. So something to think about.
So in addition to that, Art, what is the best font and font size to use for your resume?
So what I usually recommend, let me just see if I can do this. I'm going to try switching things up a little bit. I'm always at risk when I do this, but I'm going to try sharing a different screen. And we'll see if this works. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now I'm going to share the screen. Okay. Now everyone should see Microsoft Word. Is that correct? You can just tell me, Lori.
Art, all we see is a blank document. Is that what we're supposed to be seeing?
Yes, that's what we're supposed to see. Yes, exactly. And thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, everybody. So let me get to a couple of the questions you had. And one of the questions was, what's the preferred font and the preferred font size? So Calibre, I guess it's Calibre, is the default font since about 2010 or 2007. It's what I, again, called a sans serif font. So let me do that live, where I do an example of that formula. And you can see that I quickly get a whole bunch of text in that font. If I wanted to see what that looked like in another font, I could select that entire information, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, but the keyboard shortcut for selecting everything is Control plus the letter A, and that selects your entire document. Now I could change it to, let's say, Times New Roman. And you may or may not agree, if I zoom in on this, that is a little harder to read. Because notice it has all these extra, I call them doohickeys. They're just extra little embellishments that don't really need to be there. That's the default font for Word 2000. And you do still see some resumes in Times New Roman. I like to hopefully tell an employer that I'm within the last 20 years current in my computers. So I use like Calibre, and I don't think you can go wrong with that. Also, Tahoma is another one that looks very, very similar. Arial is another one that looks very, very similar. What I actually have done in the past is I go to the employer's website, I find out what their default font is, and I use that because that's what they're used to seeing, and it's going to be familiar to them. Another thing to keep in mind is just because it's the same size font, different fonts take up different amount of space. So if you have something in Calibre and then you change it to Tahoma, it's going to take up more space. Even though it's technically the same size font, or what we call point font, it's going to take up more space. It's fun to play around. Please, 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 please don't use Comic Sans or Copper Black or Algerian. Look how hard that is to read. Those are some things that are a little bit trickier. I did get a question earlier. I saw it come through. Someone had asked, well, what if I want to change the default font? Meaning that it's set to Calibri, but my company uses Tahoma, and I don't want to change it each and every time. Well, this is a great example of using the terminology we just did. And the terminology would be, I'm going to click on the Home tab, go to the font grouping, and launch that dialog box. So Home tab, it's already there. Font grouping, dialog box. I click on that, and I just choose my font, which in this case, maybe I want to go to Arial. I just choose it, and then on the bottom left, you got to be very careful about this. Don't do this just for the heck of it. You can set that as your default. And that way, every time you open up Microsoft Word, it will be in Arial. It will be a certain size. It will have a certain margin if you change the defaults. But again, be careful about that. Okay. Tell you what we'll do, because a lot of this works very, very well as a live demonstration, I'm going to stay on here and I'm going to go off my notes on the PowerPoint and kind of show you what I'm talking about in a live demonstration. When we edit text, any amount of text, there's a lot of different ways to do it. If I want to, like, say, delete something, I'm going to zoom way in here, by the way. I'm going to zoom way in so we can see it very well. And let's say I want to get rid of, I want to change footer to foot. So I could click right here, and then most everyone knows this. You just hit the backspace key a couple times, right? And it works just fine. What a lot of people do, though, is if their insertion point, and that's where I clicked, by the way, if their insertion point happens to be here, what they'll do is they'll take their mouse pointer, move it over here, click, and hit backspace two more times. You have another option. Backspace deletes one character to the left. The delete key, which is to the bottom right of the backspace key on your keyboard, deletes from the right. And I know that may be simple, may sound simple. However, they should be used 50-50. In all situations, half the time you're going to want to delete from the right, half the time from the left. And if you're only using the backspace key, it's more work. So if you haven't done that before, start integrating that into kind of your workflow with Microsoft Word. All right, let me just go forward on this. The next thing we're going to talk about is selecting text. Okay? There are many different ways to select text. If you want to select a word, you can put your pointer at the beginning of that word, and you can click and drag over that word from the left or from the right. Another option you have that not a lot of people know is you can just double click on that word, and it will select the entire word. If you want to select an entire paragraph, you have 3 real options that are all valid. You could click on the beginning of the paragraph and drag, and you don't have to go all the way across. Just go kitty corner here to the bottom right, and that's certainly an option. Another option you have is go into the left margin. Remember that white space of a margin? Put your pointer in the left-hand side, click, and drag down, and it selects an entire. It's just a little easier. But here's a third option that you may not have heard before, and that's called triple click. Everyone's heard of single click and double click, but there's actually something called triple click. And what that means is if I put my pointer anywhere in that paragraph, I triple click really fast, and it selects the entire paragraph. So that's 3 of the versions. I mean, I could talk an hour and a half on selecting. There's so many different things you can do. I think I already mentioned if you want to select your entire document, you can hit Control-A, it selects the entire document. If I want to select from this point right here to the beginning of my document, I just hold the Shift key down and click. That's another option. They're endless, really. There's a lot of different things you can do. You don't have to learn them all. By the way, the keyboard shortcuts I mentioned, I'm going to give you a cheat sheet of a page. There are literally hundreds of keyboard shortcuts, but I'll give you some of the more common ones. And what I recommend you do is if you do something new and you find that, hey, I'm using this all the time, I wonder if there's an easier way. The answer is always yes. There's always an easier way to do something if it feels like it's too bothersome. And usually that means there's a keyboard shortcut. You can always just Google it, type in, keyboard shortcut for whatever. For the most obvious ones, it's the name, the first letter in the name and the control key. So in this case, if I wanted to bold something, it would be Control B. If I wanted to underline something, Control U. I want to save something, Control S. If you ever wonder what the keyboard shortcut is, you can hover over an option, and I'm not sure if this is going to come through, but it'll show you. It'll show you that the keyboard shortcut is Control plus B. There's only 26 characters, so we run out of them very quickly. Something that we hope to cover in a future class, which would be intermediate word. If we get some feedback on this, that this was beneficial, we'll do an intermediate and an advanced class. We'll talk about cut, copy, and paste, and they all have different keyboard shortcuts. And that's all I ever use at this point. I just use keyboard shortcuts because it's the fastest method. But of course, it requires you to memorize some things, and so it's not the only thing you have to use. All right, any questions about selecting before we move on, Glory?
Yes, I don't know if this is actually about selecting, but Jane was wondering, how do you make the ruler visible?
Okay, so in the demonstration, this works better as a live demonstration. And by the way, you'll get the recording of the live demonstration, but everything I talked about is in the PowerPoint too. To make the ruler viewable, all you have to do is go to View on your ribbon, and it'll bring up the View tab. And then in the Show Grouping here, you can take off or add the ruler. Now, I will mention in the free version with a Microsoft account, that's one of the things they don't give you. They don't give you a ruler. But any version of an installed Microsoft Word, you're going to have this. And in LibreOffice, you're going to have it also.
Art, there is one more question that I think we should answer. Steve was wondering, what approach would you recommend for someone to actually get a Word certification?
Sure. There's no free Word certifications. I mean, you can. When we reopen to the public, there is something called the North Star Digital Literacy Certificate. I'm going to show you how you can look at the requirements of that, and you can actually take the test. But because you're taking it at home and it's not being proctored, or no one's watching you take, you don't get a certificate. But eventually we will reopen to the public physically, and in certain locations, and I would call ahead or email to see if there is someone to proctor. You can do that. I've done hundreds of them. It's a very basic certificate. It just says you have the core principles of Microsoft Word. A more advanced certificate is something I paid for. I paid like $85 for. I went down to the Twin Cities and I took a Microsoft Office Specialist certification. And that is much more involved. It took me a couple weeks to study it. But the cool thing is, for the rest of my life, I'm going to say I'm a Microsoft Office Specialist certified worker. And you get a nice kind of a certificate that's verifiable. So that's something to think about. Now, there are other things you can do. I know within the Coursera courses, there's a lot of certificate courses you can take. Coursera is the free training available to anyone in the state of Minnesota. I'll send you the links to that also. That's free until the end of December. There's a ton of Excel courses in there. I was not able to find a good Word course that you could take in there. If you prove me wrong, that would be awesome. I was looking for it. But I'm going to give you some other courses you can take that don't necessarily have a certificate, but you can say, I'm trained in Microsoft Word through this process. And that's better than, I'm self-taught. Because that's what most people are in Word, if you think about it. On a lot of this stuff, we're just assumed, it's just assumed that we picked it up over the course of our schooling or our work. Very seldom do we have the opportunity to take a structured course. So take advantage of what's available right now. There are some really good things out there, and I'll give you access to everything I can find. So something to consider. Anything else before we move on, Glory?
Yes, I do have a question. It says, could you send links to the North Star Digital, please?
I can, and actually it's in the slide coming up. So
okay.
like that was a planned thing, Glory. We didn't plan that, by the way. All right. So I'm going to move on to formatting text. When you want to format text, most of the formatting you do with text is on the Home tab. Right here, the Home tab. So you just got to overlay that Home tab by clicking on it. And there are three types of formats. You have character formats, which would be through the font grouping. You have paragraph formats, meaning they apply to the entire paragraph. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. And I apologize for the screen going all over the place. And those would all be this grouping. Anything that was a document-wide format, like margins or columns or things like that, would be on the Page Layout tab, which is right up here. So the first step in formatting text is you have to tell the computer what you want to format. It doesn't guess. So if you were to select this entire paragraph through whatever way, now I can format that entire paragraph. And there's a lot of different things, and I highly recommend you try them all. Just go crazy, and that's the beautiful thing of having just some sample throwaway text to work with. So if you want to change the color, you can do that. If you want to highlight part of it, you can do that. If you want to make it bold, italicized, underline, there's all sorts of different things you can do to that text. One of the nice features that has come out in recent versions of Word is once you've done all that, rather than backing all out, you can click on the top right option, which is clear all formatting. And then it's just going to go back to the default setting it had normally. In this case, it didn't remove the highlighting, so I'm going to have to go to that option and remove the highlighting. If you ever wonder what these things are, I know I just kind of cruised through them. If you hover over any of the options, it tells you what it is, and it gives a description of how to do it. And if some of these aren't familiar to you, not a bad idea to hover over and take a look at what they do, because they're important enough that they're included on the main tab, so you should at least take a look at what they do. The paragraph formats, some of the simpler ones are like center align. So if I select this, all I really have to do, because it's a paragraph format, is click anywhere in the paragraph, but I could select the whole thing too. And then I just click on any of those formats. The one thing that is on the top right of the paragraph grouping that I do want to talk about, I talk about this more than anyone I know, but let me ask you this question, and just say yes or no to the question. Have you ever put together a resume and you think, oh, I got it down to one page, and it's right down to one page, and you print it off, and a blank piece of paper spits out of the printer? Has that ever happened to you? Where you've got a blank piece of paper come out of the printer? Oh, fast and furious, a lot of yeses. Oh, someone said no. Okay. That'll never happen to you again. So like I said, remember, everyone's going to learn something here. Why that happens is no matter what keystroke you make. So I'm right down to, let me get right down to the end of this document. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Perfect example. Okay, here's my page. Here's my next page. And if I make this really small, you'll see that that second page has nothing on it. Why would Word put a blank page on there? Okay, because it says one of two pages. And if I print this off, I get a second page. And as an employer, by the way, this happens a lot, where I print out someone's resume and then I get a blank piece of paper that I've got to put back in the printer. I use it for scrap paper or whatever. Yes, David, I just saw this pop up. Well, it could have an extra enter on, or what he calls a carriage return, but it could have all sorts of different things. What we call these words right here are printable characters. That sounds silly to say printable characters. Well, why would there be unprintable characters? Well, think of all the other keystrokes you do. Enter, that doesn't print. So every time I hit enter, the computer has to say this means something. So what it does is it associates a non-printing icon. So this is what enter looks like. Okay? Yep, and there's ways to change this, but there's a really simple way of doing it. Every time I hit the space bar, I get non-printing characters. Every time I hit the tab key, I get non-printing characters. And what inevitably happens as we're creating a resume is we change things, we move things around, and we create extra non-printing characters. So the only thing you have to do to get rid of that non-printing character, and by the way, you do not have to have this turned on, this show hide, which is going to either show or hide those non-printing characters. All you have to do is say, oh, here's that thing that's there. I just click at the end of the document, hold the delete key down or press it, and it deletes that non-printing character. Now it's down to 1 page. So before you send a resume off to any employer, make sure that it has the page numbers you think it should have and delete any extra non-printing characters that are messing things up. And by the way, you'll see a lot of these. It actually tells a lot about how you created the document. If you create your resume by spacing everything out like this, that could tell an employer that it took you much, much, much longer to do this resume, and we'll really talk a little bit about what your skill level is with Microsoft Word. It's not a bad idea to get rid of those extra non-printing characters. All right. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the training resources I had mentioned. And then once we get through this, at the very end, I'll do any live demonstrations for anything. And by the way, I don't care what you ask, even if it's not intro, I will do my best to answer your questions. For those of you that were here for the intro class, don't be thrown by it. It's just an opportunity to get some questions answered. But the last thing I want to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to reshare my PowerPoint. We're going to talk about training resources. So I've, like I said, been teaching this for about 20 years, and the #1 resource that I have found, and by #1 I mean it has no ads that I found. It has no viruses associated with it. It's not going to ask you to pay for it. I mean, you should certainly donate. It's something called gcflearnfree.org, or GCF Global as it's now known, but this website would bring you right to it. It's a huge website with a lot of things. I mean, you can do anything from financial literacy to typing practice to all sorts of different things. But what I use it for a lot is Word and Excel training. So I don't recommend you try to navigate through the entire website to get to the training. A better option is just to go to Google and type in GCF Word and whatever version you have. Okay, so if you have Word 2019, 2000, 2013, whatever, type that in, and what it's going to do is the first hit, and when you search for that, is probably going to be Free Word 2016 tutorial at GCF Global. It's just the easier way to get to it, less typing, less messing around. And what that's going to do then, once you click on that, is it'll get you to the Word basics, all the way to Word, what I call intermediate or advanced intermediate. One of the questions I get quite a bit is, how much is enough? What are employers expecting? I've surveyed employers over the years, and when they say Word and Excel a must, what does that mean? What are they expecting? They expect you to know everything about the program? Do they expect you to know just what we talked about today? Employers would love if you were able to do mail merge. If you could get to the point where you could effectively do something called mail merge, which is like a form letter that takes maybe a database of some sort and puts individual information into a form letter and then creates a mass mailing or something like that, like billings or whatever. It's actually not even that complicated, but it kind of pulls together all the skills you need to get to that point. So the cool thing about GCF Learn Free is the last lesson is mail merge. So if you were to work through all 30 lessons twice, and the reason I say twice is the first time you do it, it's, oh, that's interesting. The second time you do it is, I'm going to try that. Hopefully you try it the first time, but it's going to make more sense the second time. There's a lot of videos involved in this. There's a lot of practice files, and that's what's really cool. And then they give you exercises, tasks to complete. Don't do what we're doing here today. I mean, we're doing this because there's no other option. If you have the option of doing what they're asking you to do while you're learning it, it's even better. So you can go back and forth between screens of their instruction and an open Word document, or if you're fortunate enough to have 2 screens, you can look at the instruction on one side, and oops, I'm sharing the wrong screen here, or you can, oops, oh, wait, now I'm just doing all sorts of things here. I'm going to reshare that screen, and I had the wrong one shared. I apologize for that. There we go. Okay, and you can learn more effectively that way. And again, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So make sure you're understanding the concepts. If you don't, just go back. Go back and try it again. All right. The other thing we're going to talk about is North Star Digital Literacy. And here's the link for North Star Digital Literacy. And that is basically a Minnesota company that has an organization that has gone across the United States. And they offer free testing. So you can test yourself on Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And currently, they've tried different versions in the past. It looks like currently they're on 2016. It's a very, basic test, but it'll tell you if you've passed and then what you need to work on. Here's your skills you need to improve. It doesn't say what the answer is because it is a test, but it will say kind of what concepts you didn't understand. And I will include the link on that. So you go through the GCF, you go back and you test yourself, you find out what you were doing wrong, and then you go back to that specific lesson in GCF to make sure you understand it. Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to pause. I'm going to reshare the other screen. And we are going to look at Microsoft Word, and I will answer any questions anyone has.
So Art, there is a question that says, if I created a resume in Word, why can't I open it up in Google Docs?
You can. It would depend on how your computer's set up. I just did one, by the way, just today. You would do is you would upload that document to your Google Drive, and then you would open it in Google Docs. So when you open something in Google Docs or on Drive, it doesn't have Microsoft Word installed within that service. So what it will do is it'll try to interpret that Word information as a Google Doc, and it doesn't work perfectly. I will tell you that I store all of my resumes, my cover letters, my sample reference sheets. I store them all on Google Drive as a Microsoft Word document. And then I can download them off there, and it works really well. But if I try to open it up in Google Docs, the format gets changed a little bit. If it's not allowing you to open it at all, it might be because there's some formats in your resume that it just doesn't understand.
So Roy was wondering, and I realize that he knows we're not going to be getting into the inserting pictures from the web right now, but would that be something that we would be doing maybe in the future if we had more interest in Microsoft Word?
Yep. This is the first time, actually, we've done one of these statewide skills-based training. Everything we've done up to this point has been job search related, and this is job search related because you can't create a resume without knowing a little bit about how to use a word processor. However, this is kind of new territory, so we wanted to see if there was any interest. I would love to offer more advanced, so we'll just see what the feedback is, and then we can do those things fairly quickly, a fairly quick turnaround on that. But if you wanted to insert a picture, you would just go to insert, and it's supposed to make sense, and then you can pull them off online or from your folder. I just saw one come in that says, can you store Word documents on Dropbox? I have done that for 15 years. Hard to even believe Dropbox has been around for 15 years. And I will say, Dropbox is a tremendous option because I store password protected files on Dropbox. And when I open them on Dropbox, it actually will then ask me for the password. It integrates very, very well. And that's another one of those cloud-based storage devices. It just works a little differently than Google Docs would or OneDrive would on the Microsoft side of things.
Here's another really good question. I've had this struggle myself. It says, when you are inserting bullets or indenting and it doesn't line up with the previous bullet or indent, how do you fix it?
I am so glad someone asked that question. I would not have gotten to it if you hadn't asked. This is a game changer, by the way. So let's say I have, I'm just going to go, Gloria, you're going to be famous. So you're going to put your name there. So let's let's say that I have, and I know I'm clicking really fast, but the idea here is I want to get to the specific question. So an exaggerated example of, I think, what's being asked. Is that correct, Glory? What you're saying is, how do I get this to line up with the rest of them?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so you're going to remember this moment, because I remember when someone showed this to me. This is what's called a paragraph format. So there's a lot of things involved in this. There's a little dot here. There's a space in between the dot is where the dot starts. So this is one set of formats. This is another set of formats. What you can do is you can click on the format you like, and you can click on something called Format Painter. It's right here. And by the way, it tells you all the steps. Just by hovering over it, it tells you all the steps. Click on the Format Painter, and then you click on the format you don't like. And boom, everything's good again. I know it looks weird because they're all Glory, but this will work if you have all of them like really different. So if this were over here.
Art,
here,
you know, that looked wonderful, but I think you did that way too fast. Can you do that one more time?
Yes, I did. Yes,
okay.
I appreciate that. I'll make it bigger too. Okay. So what we have here is 2 bullets or 3 bullets we like, and we have 2 bullets we don't. So what we can do is we can say, I like this format. This is the one I like. So I'm going to click here and say, this is the format I like. And then I'm going to click on something called Format Painter, which is on your clipboard grouping of your home tab. See how these, you know, all these terms kind of keep repeating? And then I click on Format Painter. And then I just click on the formats I don't like. So I just select those 2. And as soon as I let go, they become the same formats as the other. Now, I guess what I should have done here is change. It does not change the text, okay? It just changed the formats applied to that text. So again, format I like, Format Painter, format I don't like. Doesn't change the text, just the formats applied to that text. And if you have questions on that, just hover over it. It lays it out. 1, 2, 3. Here's the steps you need to take. Or there's 100 videos on YouTube about Format Painter. Once you know the term, it's easy to find the support to learn how to use that, but it's important to at least see it once. I hope that made sense.
Yes, Art, it did. That was excellent.
Okay.
I think that you're going to really appreciate a lot of the comments that they've been making in the chat too. We're getting a lot of people who are there helping each other as you're teaching. So it's been wonderful, and a lot of positive feedback on how much people are appreciating this. And like you said in the beginning that we're going to learn something, I think all of us have learned something today. I have one more question here. Sheila was wondering, where can I get my resume reviewed?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because I'm hoping you get some new skills here. You try some new things out. And what will happen then is you're going to have a Word document. You'll have a resume, and you might even try some things that exactly like we were just showing here that might have, you know, got the formatting mixed up a little bit. You're going to want to have someone review that. So what we offer at all 50 locations is 50 locations of Career Force locations is you can send your resume in and ask for a resume review. This just came up the other day. Don't send it as a PDF, because if you send it as a PDF, someone might say, I like it, I don't like it, I would change this. If you send it as a Word document, they have the opportunity to maybe help you out a little bit with the formats and maybe make things align. They can do a proofread on it. There's so many things we can do with a Word document we couldn't do with a PDF. We have local support throughout the state for this. And by the way, not that I don't want to help, but if everyone in the state sent them all to the Duluth location, we're not going to know the expectations of your local employers. And by the way, local or specific knowledge trumps anything I'm going to talk about. I may say, this is the way you should do something in your job search. Well, if you happen to know that an employer in your area wants a 9-page resume, that's local knowledge. And that's why it's really important to develop those relationships at your local Career Force locations. We are closed physically. We've been closed since, gosh, I don't even know how long it has been now, March. But we're open virtually. And there's some good and bad to that. One of the really cool things is you can send your resume as an email to your local career force location and within a couple of days get some feedback from a highly experienced job counselor. I'll be sending everyone a document that has the contact information for your local center. So please utilize that. It's underutilized, I would say. And by the way, everyone should have their resume reviewed. I always have my resume reviewed. And I like this stuff. I think I'm pretty good at it. However, I'm too close to it. There are so many things that I would miss. We're not talking about spelling errors, talking about understanding, being able to understand it, if things line up. I've been working on it so long that I can't look at it with a fresh set of eyes. Okay. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, and then maybe we'll have one or more questions here, is we have an over-reliance on something we need to talk about, which is spell check. Okay. Spell check is awesome. It's one of the, I wouldn't be employed right now if it wasn't for spell check. One of my weaknesses, I'm not the greatest at spelling. However, I do know how to use spell check, and that would be on your review tab. You can see spelling and grammar there. It will check to see if things are spelled correctly. It will not check certain things. And the one thing I'm going to leave you with here is if I were to say, take the bullets off there. You may look at that and say, oh, it's cringy. I can't even look at that. It's bugging me. And you say, well, Art, you have spell check turned off. I do not have spell check turned off. This has been spell checked. The problem is it's in capital letters. The only time most of us are going to use capital letters in documents is for headings of a resume, like section headings, like employment history or customer service experience. So one of the really nice tools that we have available to us on the font grouping of the home tab is something called change case. You click on that, put it to lowercase, and all of a sudden now spell check is going to work for us. And now we can use the tools available to maybe right-click on that. I didn't even talk about right-clicking. That's the next level. And it's going to allow us to do what we should do. And then once it's spell checked, once we know they're correct, we can select it again, and then we can change the case back up to uppercase. I've seen many resumes that were awesome resumes that had multiple misspellings because we didn't get the little red squiggly line. All right, Gloria, is there anything else we need to get to before we wrap it up for today?
I guess one more question. It says every time that I press enter, I get a blank line between my paragraphs, and how do I fix that? We'll end with that one.
Okay, great. I'm so glad actually I asked that. This is something in the newer versions of Word, and by newer, I'm dating myself a little bit here by saying the last 10 years. If I were to write my address, and this happens quite a bit for like headings of resumes, you're going to see that there is a line in between here. And based on what we just learned, some of us would say, oh, I'll go up to this show hide here and I'll find that extra paragraph mark. It isn't there. This is a format called space before or space after. And the reason it does this is because it wants to help you. If I were to do that thing I did before, what it does is it creates a blank spot between paragraphs. And remember, when I said that a paragraph is anything preceding an enter, 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 I know it seems silly, but in this case, I didn't mean for it to be a paragraph, but it is. This is a paragraph, my name and my address. So there are multiple ways of fixing it. Some are good, some are bad. The easiest way is to go up to your paragraph dialog box or even to page layout. If I click on page layout, there's the setting, spacing after. So I click up here and I click on 0 and it's fixed. I wouldn't change that as a default because it's really handy to have that extra space between paragraphs, but sometimes it's a bit of a pain. So there's the setting for that. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope everyone got to learn a little bit of something new. Hopefully we'll be able to do additional classes. I'm looking at maybe doing some Excel, some more advanced Word classes. Thank you, Gloria. I'll let you wrap it up here for today.
Wonderful. Well, we are just so delighted that you could join us today, and it looks to me like you have interest in us doing more classes like this. So just go ahead and put that in the chat, and you have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.